interested to see what the impacts are in our neighborhood and community. Stack Infrastructure is proposing to expand their existing facility. I believe they took control, got approval in 2021, started operating in mid-2023, and now applying to go from their current capacity of 8 megawatts to 56 megawatts, so we'll understand what that means. The purpose of tonight is to help us establish the facts. I think our understanding ranges. Some folks woke up and found out there was a data center in our backyard, and some are more understanding of the application that's currently before the city in regards to this expansion. So tonight's to answer those questions, understand the timelines, and I think it's also important to recognize this is not a one and done meeting. It's a commitment to several engagements, both virtual, in person, and through email, to better understand what the implications and what the timeline for this proposal is, and to help us address the important questions and concerns. I'm joined with two senior civil servants within the City of Toronto Civil Service. Christian Ventresca is the Director of Community Planning here in Scarborough. James Nowlin, the Executive Director of Environment, Climate, Forestry. So they will be very critical, helping us answer questions, and we have a commitment from our end to ensure if answers and responses are not clear, to come back to residents with more substantive answers. The company, Stack Infrastructure, had initially committed to being here today. They're not represented here today. I'm disappointed that residents will not have the opportunity to put questions directly to them. However, they have committed to leading and organizing a meeting later this month. As that gets finalized, we'll of course be in touch with everyone. If you haven't registered your email at the front, please do so we can update you on that commitment from their end as soon as possible. And on that note, I do want to acknowledge the presence of MP Dolly Bagan's office here. David, thank you for joining us, for being willing to understand and hear concerns, and to that extent, want to acknowledge and appreciate the direction Minister Solomon has provided in regards to the governance of AI, and it's important to acknowledge the federal government's direction involves data sovereignty. Stack is an American company. Foreign investment is not inherently a problem, but the federal government is increasingly treating AI infrastructure and data sovereignty as matters of national economic security. A data center located in Canada is not automatically sovereign Canadian infrastructure. So we need to understand who will control the computing capacity and what and who future tenants may be, where data and management systems will be located. So to this effect, City Council approved recently two of my colleagues, Councillor Rachel Chernos-Lynn and Councillor Sachs, who I often confer with on matters on the environment, put forth a motion that was adopted by City Council to create a working group internally to review and better understand these issues on what and how the mandate of data centers should be, and Mr. Nowlin will be speaking to that later. I won't get into it right now, but simultaneously, what is imperative is understanding how large data centers should be reviewed, including land use, electricity capacity, water consumption, environmental impacts, noise impacts, and community benefits. It's important we have time and the ability to do due diligence in regards to this specific application while Toronto better understands these issues, simultaneously while the federal and provincial governments continue developing their approaches to data sovereignty, electricity, power, water, noise, and public benefit. I'll now go over how tonight's meeting will proceed. We want to hear from as many residents as possible. Please keep your question or comment between 30 seconds to a minute. Questions may address either this specific site 3650 Danforth Avenue or Stack, or how is the city approaching this larger question of large data centers? So that's the mandate and scope for tonight's meeting. I'd like to introduce quickly members of my team, my chief of staff, Adrian Mulder, John Dunning. He'll be managing and moderating the questions and concerns. William Hopkins from my office, who's the lead on this file and will be direct in touch through email for individual concerns and questions. Makeda from communications, Karnati and Andrea were helping receive you earlier. And a commitment we're making is if we're not able to answer a question, William will be taking note, and if you're willing to share your email, connect with them afterwards, we'll ensure that a substantive response is provided in the next few days. All right, at this point, I'll turn it over to Christian James. Christian will be leading the conversation around the specific site that's in question and the application that's before the city. I think one important piece of information that's important to clarify is that this application, when it went from Eli Lilly to Stack, was within the employment land use designation. It wasn't an approval by Scarborough Community Council or Community Council because it's within that designation. Secondly, what's before council, or not before council, before staff, is called SPA, site plan approval. And that has been delegated in the last couple of years by the provincial government from council to staff. Hence the decision for this, in this application resides with city staff. Having said that, there's always room for collaboration, input, and how this process is informed by the public interest. All right, with that, I'll pass it on to Christian. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Who called for this meeting? Who proposed this meeting before we start? Why are we here and who called this meeting? That's really important to know the intent of this meeting before we proceed with anything, I think.
Yeah. So rightfully, many in the community had questions when it became known that this application was before city council, or not before city staff.
Did you call the meeting?
I organized the meeting. Yes.
You organized the
I
meeting.
organized the meeting.
So this was your impetus? You wanted to do this? Something
that's what I was proceeding with. That community and myself, we all came to know there was obvious concerns and important questions to be answered.
Who called this meeting today? It's a simple question.
You know what?
I
We're all
organized.
not that
Many
interested
people
in
asked for this
and
meeting.
so please don't monopolize this meeting. Why don't you let people talk about the issues so we can understand them, and maybe later you and Parthi can go at it if that's important.
Are you not monopolizing the meeting by telling
Folks,
me
we've got to be judicious with the time. We've got 65 minutes remaining. We can continue certain discussions outside, but let's get into the substance of the meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I don't love using a microphone, so if I start doing this, please tell me to hold the ice cream cone in front of me, okay? I think just to the previous comment, it's always good to share information, particularly because, as I'll get into my remarks, a lot of the land use permission, as the Director of Community Planning, I'm a land use planner, but a lot of the land use permission and technical review are in place for this particular land use. So the zoning bylaw considers data centers, this is defined as software development and processing, premises used for software development and testing for the collection, analysis, processing, storage, and distribution of electronic data, which is a mouthful, but we can shorten it to data centers. So anytime I say data center or software processing, I'm saying the same thing, just for the rest of the evening. And the former Eli Lilly site is both designated in our official plan, which is our overall goal for how the city develops, and in the zoning bylaw, which are specific regulations for property as employment. So the previous Eli Lilly factory has been there since the 50s, was expanded, contracted over time. There were various land uses around it. Eli Lilly started buying up all the parcels to probably keep people away from the important work that was being done in the biomedical field in the building. When they moved their manufacturing elsewhere and their head office uses into office buildings downtown, the site was put up for sale and was purchased by, I believe, First Gulf instead. First Gulf is the developer, the builder of the buildings. So the proposed build-out, or the overall campus comes together as they're proposing it in two phases. The first is the adaptive reuse of the original Eli Lilly building, for an 8 megawatt, and I'm a land use planner, that's why I introduced, I'm not an electrical engineer, so I'm not going to be able to tell you how much about that, but an 8 megawatt facility, which all equate to a smaller data center facility, and then expanded with a building along the Danforth frontage in the future, which is a new construction, which has 48 megawatt capacity. Now that's if it's operating at full capacity, full go, full compute. They have since decided that they would like to build that in phases, so it would be 2 buildings built over a period of time instead of one large building all at once. But the most important thing to remember again is from a land use perspective, the land use is permitted on the site along the Danforth frontage and the Birchmount frontage in its entirety. There's actually a zone in behind, up against the rail corridor, it doesn't have street frontage, which is zoned for heavy industrial uses. So heavy industrial uses are asphalt plants, cement batching, metal stamping, things that are big and noisy, where actually data software centers are not permitted. And that's probably because you don't want things that have a lot of computers in them to be near things that are vibrating and dusty and all these kinds of things. The land uses aren't very compatible with each other. So in 2021, the applicant proponent applied committee of adjustment to allow for use to go over the heavy industrial part of the site, which is up against the rail corridor. So it's about, I measured it at the office this afternoon, a few hundred meters from Birchmount in the back. There was actually no permission, but the building that they wanted to adaptively reuse already sat on that land. So remember, Eli Lilly was a manufacturer for a while, so that's where the manufacturing permission came from, but the warehousing, the software permission was not there. So in 2021, Committee of Adjustment held a hearing under the statutes of the Planning Act to allow for the data center use to be across the entirety of the site. So the land use permission is now there. As the council mentioned, they're in for a process right now called site plan control. Site plan control is a technical review of the building and its function on a site. It assumes land use permissions are in place, which in this case, if they are, and we are defined a very narrow group of issues that we can now comment on through the Planning Act on site plan control. So those are issues related to a level of access, grading, stormwater management, some landscaping and resiliency. It's narrowed over time. We used to have architectural control. We don't anymore. We get that back. But at the end of the day, that is the process that's underway right now. And that started, as the council mentioned, in about 2022 for the new construction. The adaptive reuse of the building is not subject to site plan control. It's subject to heritage permit because that is heritage designation, the former factory, but it proceeded with building permits. Site plan control is a step towards building permits, right? But it is a delegated matter to city staff again. So just so you know what we're looking at with site plan control, as I said, we're looking at how the building sits on the site within the parameters of the zoning bylaw, which sort of pushes it back off of Birchmount, pushes it back off of Danforth, and pushes it off of the rail corridor, and creates a little box where you can put the building. So we make sure it's inside the building. We also look at matters related to, we'll talk about tree planting first. So a number of the trees that were on the site when the existing Eli Lilly facility was there were proposed to be removed and replaced through our process. So James can probably do a better job of explaining it than I can, but basically any tree that's 30 centimeters in diameter at chest height or above is protected for city bylaws, and if one were proposed to be removed, 3 need to be planted in replacement. So in this case, there are 70 trees that are proposed to be removed, and most of those removals have already happened. Any tree that's currently on the site is proposed to be retained. So those big trees on the frontage around the sign, those trees that run up Birchmount and go along Danforth and the city right away, those are proposed to be retained. 140 trees overall will be planted across the site around the buildings to meet that replacement category. 120 are specifically replacement trees on private property. The height of the building is about 22 meters, so it's a little bit taller than the tallest part of this building, just for the scale of perspective. This building is probably about 16 meters tall. It is tallest where it kind of peaks as a building height, so it is taller than this building is right now. Probably just a little taller than the bleachers. I was trying to scale it. You called me, that's why I was late in the parking lot. I was trying to scale the height of the bleachers in the parking lot, just so we get a sense, but it's also pushed back about 15 to 16 meters from the sidewalk. So they're taller buildings, but they're pushed back with a landscape buffer. Through this process, we also looked at noise impact and rail safety. So Metrolinx had to sign off on a rail safety derailment protection plan. Any development within 300 meters of a rail corridor is subject to Metrolinx review, and as a minimum, a 30-meter setback is required. So that's to make sure that there will be heaven forbid, any issues with the rail corridor or any derailments, the buildings would be set back far enough that they would not be impacted by any issues from the trains. We also looked at the noise from the train. The train is going to be the noisiest thing on the site. The trains run at about 70 decibels when they go by. As you live in the neighborhood, I'm sure you understand. I live quite a ways from the rail corridor, but I can hear it as well. The chillers themselves operate in most cases at 40 decibels or less because they're screened. So when I talk about health and safety, we can secure screening around, we call them mechanical penthouses. So the chillers will be screened so that you're not going to be able to see the equipment. There's going to be like a kind of an open wall where the chillers are behind, and that also helps for noise attenuation. So they.
But it's day and night.
Yep.
Continuous.
Daytime and nighttime are measured, sir. Absolutely. They run a little bit. They run a little bit quieter at night. Most nights. Tonight they would be running full steam because it is a hot night. But nighttime they usually run a little chiller. The sound level limit that the city enforces on noise is 50 decibels. So if I didn't have a microphone, this is 50 decibels. So this is the highest that it can go. They're operating at about 40, which is a lower voice. So that's the sound level limits for any industrial use near a sensitive environment. Traffic is louder than the chillers. So the cars going by the site are actually louder than the chillers going past it. But that again was reviewed as part of site plan control. I talked about the trees. Really quickly, I know there's been a lot of conversation around power and water, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of conversation tonight about power and water. From the city's perspective, through site plan control, we circulate Toronto Hydro. Toronto Hydro, in a site plan level, from a land use perspective, a regulatory perspective, is simply looking at that there are existing facilities to power the site. At the site plan level, they don't look at the capacity of the grid to power the site. There's a separate application that the proponent would have to make to Toronto Hydro to determine the capacity of the grid to service the site. And we can talk about it a little bit more later. The analogy I would use is if you were buying an electric car for your house and you wanted a rapid charge station and you had to replace your circuit breaker and the wires that service your house to upgrade your service, you as a landowner would be responsible for paying for that upgrade in service. So in this case, I would imagine the proponent of the development had to go to Toronto Hydro. Toronto Hydro had to make sure that there was sufficient power in the grid to service the site, and any upgrades to that infrastructure that would be needed to meet the 8 megawatt or 48 megawatt, whatever that means in terms of power draw, would be borne by the proponent. So the city would not be funding or subsidizing the powering of this site. From a water perspective, we classify this as the heaviest water user. I had the number written down, but again, I didn't want to be tested on it, so it's something like 28,000 liters per hectare per second on average across the day. So that is the highest amount of any industrial use. So any industrial use that's proposed, that is what we measure it against. It doesn't mean that that's what they're using. It just means that we have to test for the worst possible scenario, right? There is sufficient water capacity to service domestic water. So domestic water would be water draw for any processes that happen inside the building, as well as fire suppression. In this case, most of the fire suppression is done through foam retardant because they don't want to obviously spray water on computers. That is not a good way to put out an electrical fire. But again, the consultant team for the applicant drew a study together based in close collaboration on Toronto Water's terms and conditions. That was reviewed by professional city engineering staff and accepted. So there was capacity for both domestic and fire for the site. And then finally, the drainage of the property from a stormwater and wastewater perspective, it will not produce a lot of waste water. Again, better question for the stack meeting, but they have a closed loop cooling system, so they kind of keep the water on site once it's drawn and kind of run it through their internal systems. From a stormwater perspective, the city's requirement is that any site must basically behave from a stormwater perspective at the same level as it does pre-development. So the site, when it was Eli Lilly, was heavily grassed and landscaped, and the stormwater impact, if you will, on the sewer system was based on a heavily grassed and landscaped land. The Toronto Wet Weather Flow Management Guidelines basically say the engineers have to engineer the stormwater of the new site, which will have more buildings and more pavement on it, to act like the grassy site. So they have to hold and retain water between a 2-year storm and a 100-year storm on the site and let it drip out in drier conditions. So when it's raining, they have to hold water in a stormwater tank, and they have to keep it on site until it's drier conditions, and then the water can leave the parcel. So again, that was reviewed and accepted by the city. In late 2025, just want to make sure I get my dates right, the city staff were able to issue a delegated approval, a preliminary approval of the proposal. That is subject to some refinement again because now they're choosing to phase the proposal. What it does is it gives a laundry list of things that need to be done before final approval can be granted and the applicant can proceed to a building permit. So ultimately, no development can fully advance on the site until a building permit is issued. Site plan is applicable law for a building permit. So the zoning examiner will look at the site and will say, what, the site plan is not approved yet, so you can't propose it, or you can't build what's proposed. So there's a number of conditions we've placed on the proponent, one of which is signing a site plan agreement. The site plan agreement basically binds the developer, the proponent, to build the building the way that they proposed it to the city. We reviewed it and accepted it. They can't change their plans. It also binds any future users, owners of the site, to maintain the building substantially in accordance with the building that we reviewed and approved on the site. And there's a number of legal remedies that we don't need to get into tonight in terms of what happens if they don't. Similarly, that secures financially the number of trees that can be planted, secures landscaping. I think there's some sidewalk improvements that will be happening. The sidewalks will be widened to 2.1 meters on the frontages, which is the new standard for the city. And ultimately, until all those conditions are satisfied, final approval is not granted. The phasing of the proposal is they're asking for some revisions to some of the conditions because it is complicating their ability to meet some of the conditions because they're basically building the front part in two phases. But ultimately, from a land use planning perspective, we're a ways down the road as it relates to the delegated approvals that are under our authority. Any relation to the hydro capacity, water draw, and things like that are usually subject to separate processes. I can take some questions back if I don't have the answers tonight. I tried to study it as best I could, but ultimately, that's generally where we're at with the applications that are before us.
I think one question, Christian, before we go to James, I think a lot of folks have emailed us about this timeline. I know there's a number of factors you've alluded to in terms of staff approval of site plan control. Can you speak broadly to timelines?
Sure. So again, as I mentioned, site plan and control I'm the friends you make along the way to building permit. So until we're through the site plan control process, there's no ability to pull full permits. They could pull part permits, but they seem to want to wrap it all up. Most developers from out of town do. They want to get their full approvals in place before they proceed to construction. They have, as I said, in 2025 is when their approval was preliminary granted. They have 2 years to fulfill their conditions. So within the next 2 years is when they should be working on getting these conditions fulfilled, or else their notice of approval conditions could expire, and they would have to either reapply, or they would have to go through another level of review, because these things are very fluid. A lot of standards and policies can change over time, and we want to make sure that the latest and greatest state-of-the-art city requirements are in place when the proposal is approved. So they do have an opportunity within the next 2 years to proceed to construction, but they have not yet applied for any building permits for any of the new build. All of the permits that have been issued for the site are for the adaptive reuse of the existing building and some alterations to add some office space, and nothing outside of the frame of that new building, of that existing building.
James?
There are some questions.
We're just letting.
I'll try to be really quick because I can already see lots of hands up, but I think a lot of the questions are probably more related to the site. And so if you think about Christian really is here for this specific application, why I'm here is more for that bigger question around data centers and what that potentially looks like within the city. And that's some work that the city has underway. So across a number of divisions, I'm here from environment, climate, and forestry. So my focus is generally emissions, the broader environmental impact, looking at it from kind of the big picture perspective. But there's a number of other divisions that are involved: city planning, economic development, Toronto Hydro, not a city division, but a partner, Toronto Water, Toronto Buildings. So there's a number of us who are looking at this from a bigger picture question, which is, while we may have a number of existing data centers, very small, we have this one in front of us. What does the future look like? What is the potential for growth? We know that there is growth that is happening in this sector. There's growth in terms of the use of AI and the need for data centers. And what does that look like in the city? What are the rules around that? What is the impact? And how does the city approach that? So that work was kicked off in March at the direction, as Councillor Kandaval said, from council, and it reports back next year. So at this point in time, we're in early days of doing that assessment across the city divisions, the jurisdictional stands, talking to other jurisdictions, looking at kind of the bigger picture questions that, you know, are not kind of as localized and site specific, but looking at this from a broader grid perspective, from a broader water use perspective, and having that kind of big picture. So, you know, why I'm here today is really to understand kind of at the local level some of the considerations, concerns, other questions that are coming up, things that we need to look into as we bring this back to council and provide advice on how council should approach the growth of data centers within Toronto and what that might mean and how that might impact the city and what the city should be doing related to that, where it has authority. As the councillor noted, a lot of what's happening sometimes is without the control of the city. It may be directed at a different level of government, so we're also looking into seeing what's happening at those levels and then how we as the city react and relate to that. So really my role here today is where possible to answer some of the questions around kind of these bigger questions, but also to hear from all of you in terms of some of the concerns that you have, not necessarily just with this site specific, but around data centers and potential for growth overall. So with that, I will open it up for questions as I know people are dying to have.
John from my office will be helping moderate kind of the order of questions, and we'll kindly ask folks to come up just for the benefit of everyone and to use the microphone to ask a question. Just one quick contextual piece. This is obviously not just a fascinating topic of discussion, but an evolving one. This afternoon we heard Governor Hochul, Governor of New York State, has put in a moratorium of all data centers, and it's obviously it's one that's evolving. City of Hamilton, Mississauga made it clear they're discussing it as well. What I think, to Christian's point, very unique to his point that this is delegated to staff. I think it deserves an important conversation between all municipalities, in our case Toronto, with the province on data centers. Should that be only delegated to staff? Should it include council approval? And that's something that many of us at council are actively thinking about. As I said, it is evolving, so I wanted to give that context because I think there's a rationale for that. But I also wanted to put that piece out there. This is an evolving piece from a public policy perspective, and I think finally it's incredibly fascinating, but you have rightful critiques coming both from the left and the right on this issue. We're seeing that federally as well, and we're seeing that in the United States. So with that, we'll open it up. John, if you've got a tab on folks.
Sure, folks. So just to start today, we're going to have working with each other, helping each other out, start a bit of a lineup. If it's looking too crowded, right, we'll just wait your turn sitting down. We'll have folks kind of filter in. Let's keep our questions to about 30 seconds to a minute. Focus, like Councillor Kandaval mentioned, on this site in particular and how Toronto is dealing with the data centers at large. So start making our way over the line there, and we can begin the question.
Where's the light up? Where's the light?
Hi there, my name is Tracy, and my question is with the My name is Tracy. My question is with the proposed 56 kilowatt megawatt data center, how does this compare to other data centers already in operation in Canada that are direct comparisons, like closed loop systems as they proposed? What's already happening? How successful are they? And what's the impact to the community?
So the question for those who didn't hear was, how does this relate to others in the area, or sorry, in the overall, you say Canada?
Canada.
Okay, so I don't have much more other than city, aside from some, I know that they're building some in Alberta and Saskatoon where they've already sold a lot of the compute. This is one of the larger ones, I believe slightly larger when it's fully built. Again, they're building it over phases, so you see it all the way through. It's slightly larger than the Microsoft one in the Toronto, both in terms of footprints and I'm assuming megawatts, however that works. That one is up against the highway. This one's up against the rail corridor. One of the, I believe in the initial conversations, and I'll do better lending my answers as well. There's a giant internet fiber optic cable that runs in the rail corridor, which is one of the locational advantages of this particular site. as well as power and access. So this is largely servicing the financial district, tech. James mentioned some of the economic development pieces, so I'll put it over to him after now.
And I'll speak very broadly about this. I would say, and this again is an urban context versus when you're looking at Canada, you're thinking about Canada, like other areas, some of them more rural. This is a cloud data center, so it is smaller than some of the new AI data centers that are coming up. 56 megawatts would probably be about medium size in terms of cloud. In terms of AI, you're into the hundreds of megawatts and well beyond that in terms of some of the proposals that we're seeing in the States. So it is large, but relative, if you're talking across Canada, it would not be considered a large data center relative to some of the proposals that are happening now. Again, this is an urban context, much different than a rural or in the States, we often see in desert context.
Very quickly, I think this was a common theme, is this an AI data center? When I think what we heard from James, given that the number they're seeking, 56 megawatts, does not qualify itself to be an AI data center, which has different implications and impacts on resources. Okay, just wanted to clarify that for a lot of people, that was a common question.
My name is Christina.
Louder, please.
My name is Christina, and I have a question for you first. What I need to ask you is something you said. You mentioned that you have a few meetings coming up, but you didn't say they were consultation. You said they were information. So my question is, my question is, so is done? Is it a done deal? Or we just have information coming? That's my first question.
Can you repeat the question? Yeah, I'll repeat it. The question was, earlier I said staff infrastructure had agreed to be present. They're obviously not here. They've agreed to organizing one later this month, led by them. This question on consultation, as Christian pointed out, the process that has been delineated by the province removes any approval coming to City Council. So because if we need a more technical answer, Christian can answer it, that this is within the employment land use. So if this went from Eli Lilly, a medical company, to say Mr. Christie's Cookies to a cookie manufacturer, we probably wouldn't be here, and it's a straightforward within the employment land. Similarly, this is still within the employment land use. There's no approval, it's this site plan. To my earlier comment, as we've seen in different municipalities in parts of North America, it's begetting the question, should this raise, in my opinion, yes, the need for more approvals from elected bodies, whether it's the municipal government or the provincial? I agree. So to answer your question bluntly, there is no consultation. Can there be opportunities for engagement with the public? Completely. Tonight is an example of that, and we're hoping in the next few days we get confirmation from staff to have the meeting that they want to organize and lead. So that we're waiting for them. They were supposed to be here today. We haven't sadly received confirmation.
My question was, is it a done deal? I guess there is nothing we can do to stop it. You mentioned it's national economic security for the federal government. So this means that we are going down this road, period, right? My understanding is there's not much we can do at this point. Yes or no? That's because I have another question.
Okay, so we've got to be respectful about the questions. I'll let Christian jump in just to clarify and confirm, but this decision, just so everyone's aware, is made by city staff. There are a number of factors that they have to meet approval in order to continue getting what's called the building permits. But that's important. This is an evolving question, and as James indicated, City Council gave direction to come back next year with perhaps a new process that may extract data centers from the current process.
No, come on. These people, man.
Hi, my name is Vincent, and I have a couple questions about the power and water usage. So the numbers you stated were 28 kiloliters per second and 56 megawatts. So the city's usage per second is 25,000 megawatts. and this is at 56 megawatts when it's fully built up, so that's the usage of 0.2% of the total electricity of the grid per second. How are they going to pay for this? Are they going to offload this cost onto people as other data centers have been doing in the United States? And are they going to pay for the necessary grid expansions for their data center usage? And you mentioned that it's 28 kiloliters back per second. The area is 3.65 hectares, so that's 102,000 liters per second. But in the brochure, it's mentioned that it's a closed loop system. So which is it? Is it closed loop or is it not?
So as expected water and power, I can answer the part of it, but I don't have the final math. We review it again for capacity from a water perspective, and there is sufficient pressure to service the draw that's necessary. So whether that is a one-time draw, which then is circulated through the plant as a closed loop, I don't have the engineering background to answer that. And the other question about any upgrades to the grid, that's borne by the proponent in the same way that if, again, going back to the car analogy, if you need to upgrade the service to your home to plug in a rapid charger for an electric vehicle, you as the landowner would be responsible for paying for any of the upgrades to service, so from the main transmission line to your house. And what they may have to do as well is go well upstream of that to a transformer system or something that is further beyond the boundaries of their site. But that is governed by a Toronto Hydro process that I'm not specifically involved in, but that's how the power is out.
Thank you. So we've got to go to the next speaker. But just to recap, the cost of upgrading is borne by the applicant. Number two, and this is an example of what William and our office will get back to you, because it's a very pertinent question. Is it closed loop, or are they going to be using 28,000 water per second, whatever the unit is?
Hi, my name is Alicia from the South Asian Women's and Immigrant Services. I just want to preface this, just really quickly. The fact that you don't have an engineer here who can respond to these questions is a big failure. And I think that's something that, if you're doing a consultation, you need to have a call to respond to these questions, right? The second thing is to Parthi's office, to multiple councillors' office, we have been saying that our community is not a complete community. We don't have childcare centers, we don't have a local health clinic, we don't have all these things. So the fact that we keep on having this conversation about what are the fact that these developments are going through without without an understanding of what the community's needs are, what are the actual benefits to the community, that's also continuing. Right now. And yeah, my question here is, you mentioned earlier that we don't, there are some legal parameter stuff. We won't go into too much detail with if they don't fulfill the commitments. There's a reason why we need to hear this, because the City of Toronto thinks that all the bylaws, all the regulations are being followed as planned. Even when you guys say that these costs won't be offloaded to renters. This community, Oak Ridge, Taylor, Massey, this Scarborough Southwest community has a shit ton of subletters, people who could not afford their own places. They have subletters. We have people who are in rooming houses who regularly say that their landlords offload hydro costs, electricity costs onto them. This is not the reality that you guys keep on saying. You guys keep on saying that the landlord's supposed to bear this cost, but the landlord has, to this day, has not bared any of these costs. You guys need to really understand what's happening in the community, the way that's actually, what the kind of impacts that people, the kind of challenges that people are living with on a day-to-day basis. And lastly, my question, so my question is, what is actually the accountability measures in this situation? And when I'm asking this, I'm really urging for the City of Council to really look into what is an appropriate accountability measure for a structure like this that can cause not only that not only will definitely offload costs onto renters, onto local people, but will also take away spaces that they need, and it will also not guarantee the kind of jobs that people are hoping that it would create. Again, out of 100 people that might be recruited for this project, so this is not a job creation process. I want to know more about what accountability measures are, and I want to make sure that you guys are actually making sure that there's going to be strict accountability measures, because our community has dealt with enough developers who completely abandoned the projects that they've that they've started with communities of, to suffer because of the developments that they are planning.
We invited Toronto Water, Toronto Hydro. Unfortunately, they weren't. It's July. There may be vacation concerns, but this is no. I'm not defending them. But what I think the question brings to focus is who governs this process. If this was if this was delegated to City Council and there was an approval process, then I, as the councillor, and City Council has the ability to ensure staff is present, because there's a legislative commitment. Because it's staff delegated, I'm grateful James and Christian came out today, but there's no legislative compulsion for them to be here. So this is to the bigger question on data centers: should there be a legislative commitment prescribed by the federal government, provincial or City Council? I think there's an argument, given obviously the concerns here. On the other issues, particularly on the ability to ensure that they do bear the costs, I'll let Christian speak to it.
So the accountability structure is formed by a site plan agreement, which is an agreement between the developer and the city. I sign it on behalf of the city to develop the proposal and maintain the proposal in accordance with the plans that were submitted. So it is a contract between the proponent and the city. If they change their plans, don't develop substantial conformity, penalties range from building permit revocation. If you build without a building permit, you get fined. If you're found criminally liable, if you carry on and it's not built the same way, there'd be financial penalties to put it back the way that it was supposed to be built. So if their noise, let's use noise as an example, if their noise screener would fail and it's noisier than what was expressed through the materials, and we find, going out and doing city testing, hey, that's 60. They're supposed to be 42. Those broken acoustic piles are up there for a reason. The city enforces that through property orders and property standards orders, and they have to fix it.
Does that work?
No, it doesn't.
Well, I mean, she mentioned a lot of very complex issues around landlords and tenants, which is difficult. I can only speak to development professions.
Yeah, but does it work from a development?
Yes, we've had to go and people have to fix sidewalks. I'm working with a site right now in Deputy Mayor Ainsley's ward where they haven't planted the trees that they were supposed to plant. And we're going to close on a letter of credit that we took as a financial security to go plant the trees ourselves, because they're not doing it. So we have the money and we're going to take them and do it.
The other important point the young lady made was that jobs, from what we understand, there are only 30 jobs that are being created for such a large site. And this is, and the bigger question to the earlier point is, are these Canadian jobs or are these Americans coming in? So that's, I think, another opportunity for why, when such land use permissions are being given, what is the exact economic benefit is a very legitimate question. Our next speaker.
Thank you. My name is Balance. I'm a grandparent. My name is Balance. I'm a grandparent with two daughters who have families in the neighborhood in East End. I had a bunch of questions based on what I knew. I'd like to ask my questions based on what I found out tonight. One thing I believe is that Stack is a multi-million-dollar corporation that's not Canadian. It's a Trojan horse. It is landed here with, back in 2021, began a process, according to what you've told us, to bring an application for this development, and it's already underway. I was disturbed by what was said about this being employment land use. We know this is not employment land use based on what you've just said. It's not a cookie factory going to a cookie factory. Very disturbing. Nor is it a software corporation. I just texted my, or AI or whatever you do on my cell phone, about the difference between software production and digital data center production. And just do it. It's fascinating reading that can be done in 3 minutes. Who knew? This is not a software production company. Thirdly, and lastly, I'm most concerned about how city councillors don't appear to have a voice here. I very much respect the work of city employees and their leadership on the matter, but I do feel that city councillors are being silenced in this process, and it really disturbs me. And personally, I want my city councillors to be speaking for me and our municipality every single day, particularly on this issue. So, to that matter, what can we do to stop this? Our municipal councillors, our voices at City Hall, have the voice they need, no matter what they're being told by the provincial government or what the wishes of a multi-million-dollar corporation are.
So to my earlier points, this is a live conversation with my colleagues, and the mayor, of course, is that very question to seek potentially the ability to insert ourselves into the process given how unique data centers are. And that's something many of us are sensitive and open to. I'll leave it at that without getting into a political discussion. But on a political discussion, we are fortunate to be in the middle of a soon-to-be-called provincial by-election. I think that's a very valid question to ask the candidates before, is what is the position of the provincial government? They govern how development applications operate in the city of Toronto, including the ability to remove site plan control from staff and to bring it into the elected public sphere, which I think is a very legitimate request, and that would be, interesting to see their position on it, at the very least to advocate for it within their party. And I think that's why I think this meeting and this application is fascinating, because we're simultaneously doing this larger review while there's an application right before us. So I think there's a lot of good that can come from this. As to whether changes will be enacted or if the city of Toronto takes a position 2 weeks from now at our last council meeting remains to be seen, but it is very live, I can tell you that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rose. I just want to know, it's a very simple question, I hope. What's the heat output from those cooling boxes or whatever they're called? And are you monitoring that? And because they're going to add more, are you going to be monitoring all that heat output? Because I read that these data centers, they emit immense heat and emissions. So is that something you're going to do? Monitor
So, me personally, no.
Is someone going to?
The specifics of the mechanical equipment are again part of that property standards. The specific regulations we have are solely around noise. I think James's work might be looking a little bit more at other impacts that could be, because we don't have a standard to measure it against at this point, but this is maybe where James's work will intersect with that.
So we are doing work right now, looking at data centers broadly. We'll be looking at this one specifically as it relates to our broader review on emissions, both from an air perspective, from a greenhouse gas perspective, indirect, direct. And that is all the work that's part of kind of looking at broad policy, what the impacts are from an environmental perspective. So some of the things you raised will be exactly part of that. We will be looking at it in terms of what does that mean. Again, what does one mean versus what do a number of these mean? What's the cumulative impact that a community or the city might experience if there are lots of applications coming along, foreseen large applications, and understanding that as well. The other thing we're looking into will be, for example, what does it look like from a backup power perspective? Are they using green sources, or are they using, for example, battery and storage, or are they using natural gas generators? What does that look like from an emission perspective? So that is all the work and the modeling that we currently have underway. And we'll be doing over the next few months as we report back to the council.
What about the wildfires?
Do you mind if I just add one more thing? So we were actually, because this was approved in 2025, we were able to secure what is now, as a requirement, what is now a voluntary measure, which is a green development standard. So some of the things that Gina spoke to related to the site, how the sun would hit the site and the effect off it, we were able to secure cool paving materials, cool roofs, additional shade from tree canopies, and things that might offset some of the heat that's created by the sun. So I just wanted to get that in, because that is, again, another power that's been constrained, if that's the word, by recent legislation, but we have it by this.
Hi, thanks. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk to the community here today. I have 3 quick questions. My name is Mike. So what was the name of the development company again? Can you repeat it? It was a little unclear when you said it, so I'd just like you to repeat it again. You mentioned the development firm used consultants. So which consulting firms are the consultants you've mentioned connected to? And have any city councillors or publicly elected officials that you are aware of taken any campaign contributions from folks connected to consulting firms that address city development? Thank you.
So the easier questions first, golf, FIRSTGULF. TGULF. So they're a developer that does this type of industrial scale development.
FIRSTGULF.
G as in
golf. Sorry.
G as in Google, since it's topic. It was a wide group of consultants. I don't have them all at my fingertips. Dylan Consulting was involved. I believe I have the noise report here that's in front of me that's unfortunately very slow. So I can get you that list. If you go to our application information center, quick plug for our online data repository, you can review all those reports. We just put in the 3650 Danforth address. There'll be a couple dots that come up. You're looking for the site plan control application dot and all the supporting material that was filed with the application, including all the consultants that were named, are there. They have to pass a screen. They obviously can't be in conflict with any particular both internal and external rules around lobbying. But first golf is related to the suite.
Thank you. And also the name of the actual company ownership, if that's the correct word, is Stack Infrastructure, STACK. And to your question, in my last campaign, I did not take any campaign contributions from any of the consultants of the group, or nor will I in the upcoming ones. I assume that was the implication. Next.
Okay, great. My name is Brian. I'm in the community a little bit farther to the west, but definitely concerned about what's happening here in this context. And somebody in the back yelled out, "What about the wildfires?" And I think this is a major concern with these types of developments. Anybody who came here tonight knows how hot today was. It was a scorcher, and this is the new normal. And meanwhile, and we have at the city council, we've got supposedly a climate plan that we're supposed to be in. I don't think the Ontario really actually has a climate plan. And so, like, I think, and I did, in your initial presentation, you mentioned dealing with broader grid and water issues, but you didn't mention climate, although you did just now when you responded to an earlier question. So, but my question about, and then the other aspect, somebody else brought this up, but I wanted to reiterate this again, because it's so important, is, and this was part of the pushback in Hamilton, which was a broad-based opposition to the data center there, but the Hamilton District Labor Council also came in and made the point that not only is it not have any jobs, but actually it's not in the interest of the city in terms of its own tax base, its own ongoing viability. And so I just wanted to put that forward. My question is really, given the narrow parameters of the approvals that are going on, how much impact is this environmental, climatry, forestry, whatever it was you said, I may have missed the actual term, but that bigger picture thing, how much impact does that have on it? Because, as I said earlier, the city has climate goals, but are those able to be brought to bear in this? Would they be able to be decisive in actually having an impact on whether this project goes forward?
So I'll set aside this specific project. Again, this is in the planning process. It's in site plan approval. The work we're doing now is looking at not just this project, but data centers as a whole for a lot of the things you're talking about. And my group, my team wrote the climate plan for the city. We administer that. The city has goals around net zero by 2040. They're very ambitious. They're very challenging. But now we're looking at what the impact of data centers would be as it relates to our climate goals. And that's not just from a mitigation perspective, from emissions, it is also from a resilience perspective, it is from water, so it is looking at all those environmental impacts from kind of, what does one mean? One relative to the entire city, it's very limited, but what does it mean if we see more of these? What does it mean if they're larger in size? So that is the work underway. So we're now looking at what are those emissions, how do those emissions relate? Is it all electrical? Is there natural gas use? All of the various elements, and then within that consideration of kind of the broader city goals. The other thing you mentioned was around jobs. Again, something we'll be looking into with our economic development folks is what are those from a jobs perspective? What does this mean as it relates to both the city? What is the broader perspective the federal government is looking at and trying to understand that? So that is the work that's underway to kind of take a look at these from that broad perspective. That being said, as it relates to this specific one, it is kind of in the approval process. So we'll learn from it, we'll apply it, but that is the work we report back next year in terms of looking at kind of the entire scope of the city's responsibilities and then advising council around how they could approach this both process as well as requirements, where we have authority to do that, as well as potential policies that the council may want to apply.
Thank you for bringing up that lens, and I think that's often a missing lens, is the labor question, and what kind of jobs, who gets the jobs, and the organized labor component, if any, around that. So it's a very valid thing. I think that should inform our discussion at City Council. To the question at the provincial level, I think it's very interesting given New York State Governor Hochul's decision today. Given, I think 2 weeks ago, she met with Premier Ford on economic development. So I think there is a very credible and viable political advocacy path to seek and ensure that a provincial climate lens is placed on on permissions, and on the federal level, the relevant comment is data sovereignty. Sorry, you gotta go.
Follow up? Sure. Just on the question of, I also work on a group that's put a target on the Portland Energy Center, the gas plant in the lakefront. And during that process, we found that actually the provincial targets for energy use are based on expansion of data centers. So to me, it seems ridiculous to think that Ford is actually going to change
That's certainly one of the implications, but I think given the by-election that's currently happening in our riding, that we need to raise this question both from a legislative perspective, environmental, and now, as the gentleman said, from a labor perspective.
Do we know how many people were employed by Eli Lilly?
It's a good question. I think it was in the hundreds. It was there for decades. Sorry, we've got to stick to the.
Right.
I might be able to get to that.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoe. I just wanted to clarify to an earlier comment saying that the data center was only cloud-based. It does say directly on their website, designed to meet the growing demands of AI workloads. So I think by that it is implied that it is looking to be an AI data center. My question is, and forgive me if this question has been answered, in regards to the approval process, because they have to get this application, to get this permit, what impact does our voice as constituents have? Like, is there genuinely the possibility that they can say, no, the residents don't want this data center, we will not permit you to keep expanding this? Or is it kind of like, oh, well, we're gonna build this, and the residents are a little concerned, so we'll keep an eye on it, but you still get to build this? Or is it really, if the residents say, no, we don't want it, don't build it, then genuinely their application would be denied?
How many petition do you need to stop?
Exactly.
How much if we approve this, it'll be in 10 years, we're going to approve another 56.
Yes.
Another 56. It's never going to stop.
So the land use permission is in the zoning bylaw as it is.
Yes.
And
So
they are seeing that through. And the approval the technical review of the building as it relates to the bylaw is delegated to staff at both site plan and building permit stage. So the relatively unpopular answer that I need to give, because the answer is they have permission to do this. We can control, to a certain extent, through the site plan process, its impacts on the surrounding area. James spoke to a couple other emerging potential ability to regulate and control. But we do have a narrow scope of what we are able to lean in on as it relates to tree protection. I mentioned the noise, I mentioned the rail safety, access, stormwater, etc. As James's work moves forward, that paradigm may shift, and if this second phase goes unrealized and they have to reapply against the new policy framework, that is when some of these things could manage expectations, could be re-examined. But if the land use permission remains, as the council indicated, without the need for a formal review of council, where it's not reclassified in any way, this site here, the land all the way up Birchmount, could have that permission. The answer is the answer, and that's what I have to do tonight.
So we got a date on a stab in the back, basically.
Yeah. And how do you stop $1 million company like that? Can we cap the power that they can only do this build and then they're done? And why a US company here? We want everything made in Canada.
These are very, very relevant questions. I'm going to be, I'll speak at the end in kind of next steps I envision, but taking a lot of this back to the mayor and to the premier and the minister will be critical, and of course my council colleagues. There is, I'm always a believer in political will. If there's a will, there's a
But the
way.
mayor should be sitting on something like this too.
Hi, my name is Catherine. And I'm looking for clarification about the energy resources that STAC is using now and that they plan to use with the expansion. So you said that they have paid for the on-site upgrades to Toronto Hydro, but they will still be using electricity from the grid. So they'll still be putting demands, significantly increased demands from what they're using now on the grid that we all use. So our grid, our electricity grid, is partly fueled by the gas plant that Brian mentioned, the Portland's Energy Centre. It's the biggest polluter in the GTA. Here in Scarborough Southwest, we are breathing in polluted air from the Portland's Energy Centre. So this is particulate matter, this is greenhouse gas emissions. So because of this data center, if we have to have a ramping up of the Portland's Energy Centre, that's gonna impact our air quality significantly. Also, if drawing electricity from the grid isn't sufficient for STAC, you had mentioned turbines. What does that mean? We hear about energy centers in the States with gas and diesel generators. We hear about them having their own little versions of the Portland's Energy Centre, gas-fired electricity plants on site. So this could be, really bad for our air quality.
So I'll start by talking about it from a grid perspective. You're right. Whatever energy they need or electricity they need from the grid is going to be taken from whatever the global volt system is. And right now, the global volt system includes all the sources around the province, and it is getting dirtier. It has been relatively clean from a provincial perspective, but especially as they take the nuclear facilities offline, they are ramping up gas use. And we've seen that. Portland's Energy Centre is having an expansion. It currently operates till 2034 under its approval or its contract with the province. We at the City Council have asked and requested that Portland's Energy Centre be shut down, and my team, myself, and Toronto Hydro, as well as the Atmospheric Fund, are developing work around how we can actually reduce reliance on the Portland's Energy Centre and eventually look for complete closure of the Portland's Energy Centre for a lot of different reasons, but in particular as it relates to both greenhouse gas emissions and local air quality. So as it stands right now, any energy coming in would pull from any of those sources, regardless of where they're at in the province, through that system, and it would be using the Portland's Energy Center. That being said, I think my general understanding is the Portland's Energy Center is running pretty much full-time anyway, so I don't know how much worse it's going to get. What we're trying to do is actually make it better, and any initial draws, regardless of this site or elsewhere, is the work we're doing to ensure that we're getting more clean electricity related to it.
Well, what about the on-site gas? What about the on-site
So
gas?
I was going to grab that, the on-site
Yeah,
gas
so
question.
they can-
Do I need to stand up so people can see? So the on-site generation is backup for power failures only. They will not run, they will not trigger on unless.
Is that a condition of?
Yeah,
approval?
they're labeled as backup generator systems, and the noise work specifically mentioned if the chillers and the gas were on, they compile them on top of each other. They would never be on at the same time, because if the chillers are run by electricity, so they would be off in a power failure, and that's when the backup generator would kick in. It's not a both and situation, and that would be, as much as we can regulate it, part of the site plan agreement, but again, the operations of the building, I can't speak exactly to how quickly they would fire in an emergency, or how long they would stay on, or if they're charging batteries.
Or power is just gonna happen when it's 37 degrees and the air quality is already poor, right? Like a day like today. And then you're gonna add particulate, ozone at a ground level, and these aren't stacks like Portland. They're not a big stack. How tall is it? How far are those emissions being spread?
They're about the same height as the building. They're 20 meters.
It's not tall.
And what are the turbines that you mentioned? They
They're
might
gas.
opt to use turbines, you had said.
No, they're a backup power generator. That's the only thing.
It's a gas-powered turbine.
It's a gas-powered turbine.
Okay, can I ask one quick follow-up question, please?
I'll try to be as short as I can with it.
Thank you.
Matthew.
Yeah, so the obvious alternatives would be renewables. Has the city done anything to encourage stack to investigate renewables? They have all these flat roofs. Why can't they put solar panels on their flat roofs?
So specifically to stack, this particular one, it was an option available to them under the green standard, and they did not. So under the green standard that I mentioned earlier, there's 3 different options for roof types. Green roofs, which are usually designed for industrial and software because dirt particulates on the roof don't do well with the equipment inside. Cool roofs, which they chose to do, or they could have solar, but they did not propose solar, and we cannot force that.
You can't force it.
And so the question around what we do in the future.
So what's your job then?
Can we do it in the future? We are constricted by the provincial regulations in terms of what we can require now. So the province for Bill 98 removed the Toronto Green Standard. We did have a plan to phase it out over time to require more stringent requirements. That's no longer in place. We also have the ability to put in place green roofs removed. We do have programs, and we do work with, again, not speak to specific development, but developers or other people in terms of supporting solar, supporting battery storage. So we have a number of things, but they are voluntary in terms of their uptake. And we work with Hydro as well as the atmospheric funds and others in terms of providing financing, looking at simplifying rules, all of that to try to get people to do that. But again, it's up to the individual proponent on whether they choose to take that on.
Folks, just to please be respectful. Staff are here voluntarily. They're not compelled to be here. Their job is tremendous.
Thank you, staff.
The gentleman, please be respectful to staff. Just a reminder, we've got 5 minutes left, so let's try to get as many questions in as possible.
Hi there, my name is Tila. I just wanted to say, as Canadians, we always look to America and we say, oh, they made a mistake there, we're not going to go down that same pathway. And here we have seen, we all look at the media, we see, wells drying up, bills doubling or tripling for utilities, noise, poor air quality, all of those things. And so I just wondered, because I understand that you and your team are employees, and I wondered who is the person that you're reporting to? Is it Mayor Chow? Is it Premier Ford? Like who's the person that prevents you from being able to reject a petition like this or a request like this from staff out of hand? Because you have already observed and said, okay, we're going to try to mitigate this, we're going to try to enhance this, but like what prevents you from just saying no? In our roles as experts, we don't think we should proceed, and is someone compelling you to say yes to the permits?
Broadly speaking, so Christian and I are civil servants. We are responsible to council. So we provide advice to all councillors and mayor. We provide it equally around some of these big questions. As it relates to the type of advice we can provide, we're constrained by a number of things. We're constrained by prior decisions the council may make. We're constrained by the legislative framework which we operate. So for example, Christian can only do things that he's allowed to do under the Planning Act. I can only do things that I'm allowed to do under different environmental legislation. And that can be set by the province, that can be set by the federal government. So when we are providing advice, we are doing it within the context of both the legal frameworks that we work within, prior council decisions, but it is with, here is the nonpartisan factual information for council to make decisions on. So as it relates to kind of where we're at now, let's speak very broadly. It may not feel like it, but for us, a lot of this is an emerging issue as we see what's happening in the States, as we understand kind of, going from what typically have been small in terms of scale data centers to potential for very large. This one being, as it relates to what we're seeing, kind of more of a medium-sized one. And so we're trying to gather the information, come back and come into council and provide advice and say, within the powers that council has, here's how they can approach this decision. Here are the trade-offs, here are the concerns that residents are bringing up. So that is our role within the conflict, within the constraints that we work within, which involve a number of different legal and other rules.
James touched on it, but our authorities for site plan control and for zoning stem from the Planning Act, which is a provincial authority constitutionally, and they delegate what they're willing to delegate to the city, and they legislatively can narrow the number of issues that we can and can't speak to. So at this particular level, I'll just pick on architectural control. We used to be able to enforce and require materiality of buildings. Recent planning legislation removed that ability from the city to be able to require and govern.
So just to clarify, so it's the province?
It's Doug
Ford.
It's Doug Ford.
Yeah.
Don't vote for.
One last question. Mark's very short.
Yes, exactly.
Hi, my name is Erin. So we've heard you guys say a lot of things. I've heard a lot of words. And I heard you guys say that this will not create any new jobs. I've heard you say that this is not a Canadian company. I've heard you say that this will increase the energy capacity and impact the communities and everyone here. And I've heard you guys come to us and say, the community can't do anything about it. And so I'm here to ask what you can do about it. And so I know maybe things seem a little bit out of your hands. Someone just said Doug Ford, right? I want to ask, will you commit to pushing forward and lobbying for a provincial-wide moratorium to stop data center developments like this one that's impacting these communities? Because that's something you can
As I shared earlier, this is heavy on my mind. I didn't want to start the meeting off with discussion on moratorium, especially in light of New York State governor's decision. It's certainly a binary approach, but something heavily on my mind as we approach city council.
So what I'm hearing is you won't commit to doing that. Is that what you're saying?
I'm committed to working with the mayor and city council to ensure due diligence is done on this application before we get to site plan approvals and control given. Can I please finish? This is a nuanced, complex discussion. It's very easy to make. Yeah.
It's complex for working class communities, but never nuanced and complex for these development applications.
Can I please answer? So yes, I am open to advocating and supporting a moratorium, whether it's at city council or obviously with less political influence at the provincial level. Yes, I'm complete. We need to do due diligence. I think it's abundantly clear data centers are not cookie factories, right? That is abundantly clear. So what does that mean from a governance perspective? Does that require us to pause? Potentially, I know colleagues of mine feel strongly when Councillor Sachs and Rachel Chernow-Flynn brought it in. Initially, that was the concept. That was being considered heavily. There were considerations by multiple power centers within City Council, and what was passed was a commitment to come back with a policy. So I do want to say, yes, I am definitely open to that, whether it's at the city level for us to say as council.
Project, make some noise. These are your constituents. We don't want to hear your lip service.
It's not lip service. This is a decision not by me, it's by council and the provincial government. On that note, I think that's a great way to end our meeting. Please be connected by email towards us. We'll be updating you as soon as we get confirmation of staff. It's very critical. We bring the same energy and passion to them as well, and potentially as city council and provincial government. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I was a big impetus for getting Parthi to pull this meeting, and I really commend Parthi for doing that. He's the first one in Ward 20 in Southwest who's done this. And it sounds like it will be continued now. But I want to say too that there are alternatives. I started a Facebook group, a private group, and it's private because we don't want trolls, we don't want people talking about chemtrails and conspiracy theory. But there are other groups here, and Representative of Climate Fast was going to be here. They have a virtual town hall tomorrow that there's something on the table here about that is streamed and would be very valuable. There are other groups here. Council of Canadians, there's a professor here who has information from the Council of Canadians, a full handbook there.
Can they raise their hand?
Is he still here? Okay, yes. Yeah. So anyway, there are many things to be done, but the main thing is that we have a QR code to sign up for people to stay in touch. So I have these little brochures that I've been passing out. And get on our mailing list, and we will keep you posted.
Conclusion of the meeting, we have Canada Councillor Kevin Rupasinghe running again for council. How are you doing, Kevin?
Good, it's Rupasinghe.
Yeah, Rupasinghe, thank you. So we didn't have time to get all the questions, so I want you to ask your question that you didn't get a chance to.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of folks out tonight, and we're asking lots of good questions, and I think there was a good conversation. But what I wanted to ask, well, really, as part of the conversation, there's a bit of context that makes sense. So, when we talk about Toronto Water, which is going to be providing water for the centre, they subsidize water for large industrial customers. And part of the reason for that is you want to make sure that if you're creating jobs through industry and business, that you're incentivizing that kind of thing. Because we want to have good jobs in Toronto. I don't know that this is necessarily going to get them. Same thing with Toronto Hydro. People talk about the 56 megawatts. I don't think people appreciate how much that actually is. The average household is about 0.75 kilowatts, so less than a kilowatt. This data center is proposed for 56,000 kilowatts. And so if you think about Scarborough Southwest, everything from Victoria Park over to Markham Road, everything from Eglinton down to the lake, every household, not just single family homes, every house and town hall and apartment home, all put together, there's 40,000 houses, which might be about 30,000 megawatts, or 30,000 kilowatts. So we're talking about a data center that is potentially using as much power as every home in Scarborough Southwest times 2, roughly. That is an astonishing amount of power, and I don't believe the grid can actually handle it. And if not, what are we doing with Toronto Water and Toronto Hydro through their permitting process to actually make sure that we have the infrastructure that we need? If planning has had its teeth removed from the province, what are the other two agencies and departments in the city doing? And I also wanted to ask the same thing from our councillors. There are lots of other people involved in these decisions. What has our councillor done to actually engage our MPPs, our MP, the mayor, and these agencies to actually get the best outcome for the community here? Because we've known this is coming since 2023. It's like the shark in Jaws sneaking up on us. It's been 3 years. This can't be the first conversation that we're actually having with our counterparts.
Thank you so much, Kevin.